Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Basic Education Board.
Hello students, welcome to the TV learning programs. As usual, I'm a teacher Herbert, and I will be taking you through the biology and health science. Senior 2, we are still on the same unit, gaseous exchange in humans and even in plants. So last time we talked about gaseous exchange in human, and now we're going to talk about the breathing mechanism in human. So student, before we start our lesson, I would like to inform you to get a pen and even a notebook. You try to note some important concepts and even words that are concerning about that lesson. So let's start our lesson, and we have the learning objectives of the lesson. At the end of that unit or that lesson, we have to be able to explain the mechanism of breathing in human. We describe about the human breathing system. We demonstrate the gaseous exchange in the alveolar sac or in alveoli. So those are learning objectives of the lesson. So quickly, let's go to the breathing mechanism in human. And I know you know what we discussed lastly when we've been discussing about respiratory system. And we discussed what are the major properties of respiratory system. We tried to mention some of the respiratory surfaces or structures that are used by different organisms. If you remember, you can try to highlight some of them. And we said human, what does human use as a structure of gaseous exchange? We mentioned the lungs. We talked about the fish uses the gills. The insect uses the tracheal system or sometimes uses the spiracles. We talked about the frog and toads. We mentioned that toads, most of the time they can use the buccal gaseous exchange, and as well as the frogs can use the skin. And we say the skin, if the skin is permeable, easy for diffusion to take place. The exchange of oxygen with carbon dioxide can also occur. So we have to talk about now the breathing mechanism. How do we breathe? How does the mechanism of breathing take place in human? Take your time to think about it, and then we discuss it in detail. How do breathing mechanism takes place in human beings? I know we use the lungs in the process of breathing. And earlier, on the last lesson, we talked about breathing process. A process of breathing is referred to as ventilation. I know some of you have ventilators at your home, and I can ask you, what does the ventilators that you have at your home are used for? They are used to allow air to enter in your house, that is air entering and even exit of some of the gases which are not useful has to be passed out from the house. So ventilation. Talk about ventilation, it means it involves two processes. The process of inhalation as well as the process of exhalation. So let's go quickly to the process, and we try to highlight these things, and we try to know. As I mentioned, in human beings, the process of gaseous exchange, the process of breathing, is referred to as ventilation. And it is the first part, the gaseous exchange process, that takes place in a body. The second part in exchange of these gases between the lungs and even the blood. The first one is the breathing. The second one involves the exchange of gases between the blood and the lungs. So we mentioned, let us go through about that. We mentioned that breathing provides a continuous supply of fresh air to gas exchange surface. Talk about the gas exchange surface. We talk about the lungs, and also helps maintain a large diffusion gradient across the gaseous exchange surface. Student, I would like to ask you, the question is this: why am I talking about diffusion gradient? You remember when we talk about the diffusion gradient, it refers to the differences in concentration. You may find inside the body there are more oxygen compared to the atmospheric pressure, which is outside. So that one would be we encourage to inhale, to do what you call inhalation. When the atmospheric pressure is very high compared to the internal pressure, that one will be involving what you call inhalation. And when atmospheric pressure is very less compared to the internal pressure inside the lungs, what will happen? It will happen, we will do what we call exhalation, breathing out and breathing in mechanism. So I mentioned that breathing in is referred to as inhalation, and breathing out is referred to as exhalation. That's why I mentioned that in that process, the breathing provides a continuous supply of fresh air to gas exchange surface. This gas exchange surface, we mentioned about the lungs. It also helps to maintain a large diffusion gradient across the gaseous exchange, diffusion gradient. We talk about diffusion gradient, differences in concentration. May find outside atmospheric, there are more concentrated oxygen compared to the internal of the lungs, so that one will just encourage the air to be taken in. So let's talk about the volume of the gases exchanged during breathing. Changes according to let me just read through. The volume of gases exchanged during breathing changes according to the physiological demand placed on the body. For example, during exercise, when there's high demand, automatically inhalation will just be increased. And biology is what you call respiratory reserve volume and expiratory reserve volume. So it means that when there's high demand, when you're doing more exercise, there's high demand of oxygen. And that one will be forced to do what you call inhalation. And when there is no demand, maybe you're at rest, you don't need more oxygen. Because as you are doing what you call, as you breathe in, automatically, the tidal volume increases. The tidal volume increases when the respiratory reserve volume increases. The respiratory reserve volume increases. The inspiratory reserve volume increases. And once the expiratory reserve volume increases, automatically you do what you call exhalation. And that one involves what you call breathing rate is controlled by the respiratory center in the brain. If I can tell you the respiratory center that controls the breathing mechanism in our body is referred to as hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a part of the midbrain which is responsible for controlling the breathing mechanism in our body. So it means that also breathing mechanism is also controlled by the brain. All right? So it means that once there's more air, there must be some of the impulses that are going to send to the responsible muscles. Take an example, what are those muscles I'm mentioning? I'm mentioning about the internal and external intercostal muscles. I'm talking about the rib cage. I'm talking about the diaphragm, all right? Where they have to contract or to relax, basing when the body is doing what you call inspiration or expiration. Let's see the structure of human breathing system. We have a very good diagram. The diagram is trying to illustrate the human breathing system. All right? Let's go through the diagram, and we try to see. We have the nostril. We have pleural membrane. We have the larynx. We have the trachea or the windpipe. We have the ring of the cartilages. Most of the trachea is normally having what you call cartilages, supporting trachea. These are very important in terms of supporting the trachea. We have these lungs. Because our body must be having two lungs. We have the left lung and also have the right, another on the right side. So we have the bronchi. The bronchi, before we have the bronchi, we normally branch from what you call the bronchioles. And the bronchioles, we normally branch from what you call alveoli. We have these ribs, not rims, we talk about ribs. These are called ribs. We have the diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped structure. Dome-shaped structure. When you breathe, when you do what you call exhalation, the diaphragm moves up. It forms what you call a dome-shaped structure. A dome-shaped structure. When you breathe out, when you are breathing out, it forms a dome shape. It moves. The diaphragm moves up. Then when you breathe in, the diaphragm is flattened. It inflates. Talk about this, what you call inflate and deflate. These are two biological terms, and they are very important. The diaphragm forms a dome-shaped structure when you breathe out. But when you breathe in, the diaphragm flattens. We have the internal intercostal muscles, as well as we have external intercostal muscles. All these parts that I'm mentioning, they are very important. They are very vital as far as breathing mechanism is concerned. They play a very big role in the breathing mechanism. We're going to see how do we breathe? How is breathing mechanism occur in our body? As I mentioned, the process that brings air into the lungs and removes it again is known as breathing. The process how air is brought into the lungs and how air is brought out of the lungs in biology is referred to as breathing. Breathing involves two phases or two stages. One is called inhalation, then the second one is called exhalation. So let's go through, as mentioned, the process that brings air into the lungs and removes it again is known as breathing. I think everybody of you is familiar, is getting aware of breathing. Everybody can breathe. I don't think that nobody, every person, every living organism has to breathe, how to do what you call respire. And how do we respire? How do we breathe? It is very interesting to know how is the breathing mechanism takes place in our body. Think about it, and then I said the two phases that are involved in breathing are referred to as inhalation as well as exhalation. Since the lungs contains no muscles and muscle tissues, and the lungs don't contain muscle tissues. They are not capable of independent movement. They are not able to take in oxygen by itself. However, they are elastic. And during breathing, they are forced to expand or contract. And as a result, the pressure changes around them. When the lungs are able to expand and contract, automatically what happens in the lungs? The pressure within them also changes. That is what you call about breathing mechanism. So you should be knowing that the lungs, they don't have muscle tissues. If they don't have muscle tissues, and they are not capable of being independent, so it means they depend on other body structures. Take an example on the diaphragm, internal intercostal muscles, and where they are able to carry the process of gaseous exchange. As I mentioned, they are elastic. The lungs are elastic. And during breathing, they are forced to expand. They are forced to expand and contract. As a result, the pressure around them also and around them. That one also forces the pressure to enter them. I know some of you know about electrophysics. When we talk about pressure, is inversely proportional to the volume. Pressure is inversely proportional to the volume. What does it mean? It means that once the pressure increases, what happens? The volume. Once the pressure increases, the volume also. Once pressure increases, the volume. Once pressure decreases, the volume increases. And once volume increases, also pressure decreases. In those two things, we're going to be dealing with what we call pressure and volume. That one will bring us to the idea of what we call breathing mechanism. Talk about atmospheric pressure outside and even the pressure inside the lungs. What happens when we are breathing? It is very interesting to know how pressure. When the pressure increases in the lungs, automatically the volume in the lungs decreases. Once the atmospheric pressure increases outside and the volume in the lungs, increases, automatically that one will be forced to take air inside the lungs. So since the lungs contains no muscles, as I mentioned it, that one is also, we're going to talk about it. The pressure changes, the pressure changes are caused by the movement of the muscles of the diaphragm. So the pressure to change must be caused by either the movement of the muscles of the diaphragms, the ribs, and even the internal intercostal muscles. That you talk about internal intercostal muscles, I mean the rib muscles. And even by the force of atmospheric pressure. We are considering two things: atmospheric pressure and internal pressure within the lungs. Let's start with the inhalation, or what we call breathing in. When we talk about inhalation or breathing in, inhalation is also known as what we call inspiration, as I mentioned it. Let's have two things. I said inspiration. Inspiration is also called inhalation, or taking in air into the body. Then expiration is also called exhalation. So we have these two terminologies or biological terms that are involved in breathing mechanism. So I said inhalation is also known as inspiration, and this is the active phase of breathing which draws air from the lungs. This is the active process where the air must be drawn from atmospheric pressure, from atmosphere, and is drawn into the lungs. During inhalation, the diaphragm or the muscle, the diaphragm, what happens to the diaphragm? The diaphragm automatically must be moving upward and outwards. And they also have to contract, causing it to what you call that is during inhalation, causing it to be flattened. At the figure, we're going to see it in the below. The rib regions, the external intercostal muscles, they have to contract. And once the external intercostal muscles contract, what happens to the internal intercostal muscles? The internal intercostal muscles, they have to relax because they're antagonistic. They work antagonistically. If I mention antagonistically, they contract and relax in intervals. While the internal intercostal muscles, they relax, as I mentioned it. This causes the rib cage to move upwards and outwards. And that one must be showing the air must be drawn from outside to the inside. We have a diagram. Students go through the diagram of what you call inhalation, the breathing mechanism. You can see the rib cage has moved upward. The diaphragm contracts and flattens. Normally it has contract and moves upward. Automatically, the external intercostal muscles, they contract. And once they contract, that one will force the internal intercostal muscles to relax. And the air must be drawn from the environment to the internal into the lungs. That one is referred to as inspiration or inhalation. We have the contraction of the diaphragm, and the external intercostal muscles increases the volume in the chest. By that time, when the external intercostal muscles contract, and the internal one relaxes, and the diaphragm is also contract, that one eventually will increase the volume of the chest cavity. And now, by that one, it means that the air is going to be drawn from atmosphere and taken into the lungs, and we do what we call inhalation. It causes the decrease in the pressure of air inside. The pressure inside will decrease, all right? And the air rushes through the air passages into the lungs and force them to do what? To expand. We have exhalation. Exhalation is also known as what we call expiration, as I will have it on our chalkboard. This is the phase of breathing out, which expels air out of the lungs. That is when oxygen is taken, carbon dioxide must be expelled out, and oxygen must be taken in. And I said the diaphragm muscles, by that time, the diaphragm muscles relax and makes it to move upward and regain its dome-shaped structure. It will form what we call a dome-shaped structure. A dome-shaped structure, these are the ribs, and it forms what we call this one is called a dome-shaped structure. All right? And I said during that inhalation, the diaphragm muscles relax and makes it to move upward and regain its dome-shaped structure. The external intercostal muscles relax and the internal intercostal muscles contract. That one has mentioned it earlier. The external intercostal muscles, they do relax, but the internal one, they recontract. And eventually, what happened? The muscles will contract, and this one causes the rib cage to move upwards and outwards. And now air is going to be expelled out from the body. And by this, it means that the volume of the chest cavity will not increase. Instead, it will decrease. And the pressure increases compared to atmospheric pressure. So the pressure inside will decrease compared to atmospheric pressure, which is very high. So this increases the pressure, forces air out of the lungs, which becomes deflated. This is the diagram that shows what we call exhalation, breathing out, which is quite different. The other arrows were moving upwards, but these ones are moving downwards, which means these muscles, the rib moves up inwards, not outwards and downwards, which is contrary to what we've been talking about in terms of inhalation. Lungs are deflates, and the diaphragm relax and regain its dome-shaped structure. This is a dome-shaped structure during what we call exhalation. Gaseous exchange in alveolar sac. Air passes the nose because of the mouth as it moves down in trachea. The trachea is divided into left and right bronchi. The bronchi also, each bronchus is divided into smaller bronchioles, and each bronchi is in turn attached to numerous alveolar sacs. The group of alveolar that take a smaller shape like a bunch of grapes. You know what I call grapes. If you see some of you normally eat grapes, these are something that normally resembles what you call grapes. So these are structures you can try to see. This is the air entering. This is a bronchio. Bronchio, these are blood vessels which are surrounding these alveolars. We have the side which is the oxygenated blood, which is entering, which is also exchanging with oxygenated blood. And these are blood capillaries which are supplying with the alveolar with oxygen and even nutrients without forgetting removing the waste product from the lungs. Gaseous exchange at alveolar takes place between the phases of inhalation and exhalation. The alveolar is suitable point for gaseous exchange because it has the following. Why do we say that the alveolar is suitable for gaseous exchange? Number one, it is supplied with the blood which carries gases being exchanged, oxygenated and oxygenated. They are very thin for easy diffusion across which gases can diffuse between it and even the blood, meaning the blood can just be diffusing between it and within the blood. Not only that, it is lined with a thin film of moisture. We've been talking about adaptations of the respiratory system. It is thin. It is moisture. So it means also the alveoli must be moisture for moisture to diffuse the diffusing gases. A ventilation process brings in and takes away air containing gases being exchanged. It has a very large number of alveoli to increase their surface area for gaseous exchange. We have the diagram that shows how gas exchange between the air within the alveolar and even pulmonary capillaries occurs by diffusion. All these processes, they normally occur by diffusion. So we're going to see how oxygen in air is entering in alveolar space at a high concentration than that in blood capillaries, because in blood capillaries, there is less concentration of oxygen. So they have to exchange with less oxygen, compare that one with more oxygen. This is a diagram. We do have what we call, this one is called the ventilation. Air is going to be taken in, moves in and out. What is going to be moving out? Automatically, this is alveolar sac, which is moisture and thin, and also must be, as the blood is moving from this direction, the blood as it is moving from these blood capillaries, this is moving as, maybe if you're trying to observe it clearly, when you're moving from the right side, going to this side, it must be becoming more reddish. It means that once the blood is entering from here, the carbon dioxide is diffusing out from from the blood capillary, and oxygen is being loaded in hemoglobin. So we try to see, these are red blood cells, these are thin wall of capillaries. The deoxygenated blood is moving from that end. Let me try to make it in terms of quantification. Let me say this is maybe from 10, when you're going to reach here up to maybe at 80. Now the blood is going to be full with oxygen. That one is gaseous exchange in alveolar sac. As I mentioned, diffusion gradient is essential for rapid exchange in alveolar. If there's no diffusion gradient, there will not be a faster rate of exchange of gases between the blood capillaries and even alveolar sac. We have to understand that. So diffusion gradient is essential for rapid gaseous exchange in alveolus. The following must be having some factors that makes it to be more essential for gaseous exchange. There are a number of factors that contributes towards the maintaining this diffusion gradient. As I mentioned it earlier, diffusion gradient refers to differences in concentration. From higher concentration to lower concentration. Talk about down the concentration gradient. So there must be thing that makes this oxygen to enter and carbon dioxide to leave. Number one is what we call lung ventilation. Breathing movements transports respiratory gases to and from the alveoli because the lungs are the one to transport oxygen or carbon dioxide must be leaving the blood capillary automatically. But for the case of the lungs must be able breathing movement to transport respiratory gases to and from the alveoli. Number two, the blood flow. This constantly replaces oxygenated blood with deoxygenated blood. Automatically, we have seen on a diagram of what we call the gaseous exchange in alveoli. There must be oxygenated blood must be replacing deoxygenated blood in blood capillaries. Number three, we talk about what we call blood. The pulmonary artery brings blood low in oxygen concentration and in high carbon dioxide concentration. The pulmonary veins takes away blood high in oxygen concentration and low in carbon dioxide concentration. So pulmonary artery bring deoxygenated blood. Then pulmonary vein, they bring oxygenated blood. That is the common difference on that. Hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is very important. It quickly combines with oxygen and prevents its accumulation in alveoli because once the oxygen accumulates in alveoli and it does not combine with the hemoglobin, so it means transport of blood with less oxygen will occur. So it means that hemoglobin, it quickly combines with oxygen and prevents its accumulation in alveolar sac. So let's have the lesson assessment. We have the lesson assessment. So you go through that lesson assessment and see you next time.